welcome back to my YouTube channel, and you are watching The Nerdy Grail. Now, I've got a Doctor Who video for you today, as yesterday was the 61st anniversary of Doctor Who, so it was Doctor Who Day, so happy anniversary, happy birthday Doctor Who. You have really brought a lot of joy into my life and the life of so many people all across the world, and I'm so glad you're still going strong to this day. And they announced a couple of things on Doctor Who Day. However, I'm still awaiting the announcement of what the next collection box set is going to be. Lee Binding teased us with the artwork a little while ago. Not the full artwork, just a little tiny little snippet. But I want to know what the next set is going to be. But in this video, it's a bit of a... I wouldn't say it's a controversial video. I would just say that I know it's going to rattle a few people. Because into this video today, I'm going to be talking about the Doctor Who colorizations, because one of the things that was announced yesterday was the colorization of the story The War Games, which is the last story to feature Patrick Troughton in the role of the Second Doctor. Jamie McCrimmon leaves as well, Fraser Hines, and also Wendy Pabry finishes as Zoe Herriot. It is a 10-part epic story. And is responsible for introducing the Time Lords. It's the first time that the Doctor's actually referred to as being a Time Lord, and it's the next regeneration story, and it's also the transition into colour as well, because after the War Games, Doctor Who then, going forward from John Pertwee, was televised in colour. So now they're bringing this into this colourised version. And in this video, I'm going to be discussing whether or not these colorizations, firstly, are actually needed, but also, are they actually good? So that's why it's going to be a little bit controversial, because my opinions on these colorizations are a bit mixed, to say the least, if I'm being perfectly honest. But what I'm going to talk about in this video, I'm going to break it down into a couple of sections. Firstly, I'm going to talk about the positives of these colorizations, like what's the good things about having these colorizations, and I'll also be briefly discussing the previous colorization of the Daleks that we got last year with William Hartnell. I'll also be talking about the negatives, and then I'll be bringing the video together to discuss maybe future stories that could benefit from colorization, and also my overall thoughts. But let's waste no more time now and jump straight in to the positives of these colorizations. So to begin with, let's talk about the positives, because there are some positives about these edited and colorized versions of classic 1960s stories. I mean, the first positive, of course, is the fact that they're in color. Because let's be real, we've always, even as hardcore Doctor Who fans, have always been interested to see what would stories such as the Daleks have looked like actually in colour. We got a little bit of a taste of that thanks to the Peter Cushing movies, which both of those movies are fantastic, and I'm gutted that we didn't get one for The Chase. But they gave us a little taste of what it could look like. And the colorizations for both the Daleks and the trailer that we got yesterday for the War Games do show promise and are really good. I really enjoyed getting to see the colours, and at times the colours really popped, especially on some of the outfits, like for the Doctor and for Barbara in particular. But yeah, I love the use of the colours. Obviously they don't look perfect, but for what it's worth, they are really, really nice. And the War Games trailer that we got, some of the colours on there look fantastic. And at the end of the Daleks in colour, it gave us a little bit of like a teaser, almost like a coming soon on the show, but showing all the Hartnell years, but in colour. They flew through lots of different clips from like the Massacre, from the Web Planet, from the 10th Planet, from the Celestial Toy Maker, showing us all these different things in colour, and it looked really, really good and made me really interested to see what could these 1960s stories look like in colour. And I think that is absolutely fantastic. So yeah, one positive has to be the colour, because I can't deny they do look beautiful in colour. The OG in me still prefers the black and white because it gives it that eerie vibe, but to have the option to switch it to colour, I think is really, really good, really, really nice, especially for newer people coming into Doctor Who might not necessarily be into the old black and white style of things. So to get the option to watch it in colour, I think is a good job. So you get big tick, big positive from me on that. The next positive I will say, this also can be a negative, so I will discuss it in the negative section as well. But another positive, on the one hand, is the shorter run times. Because let's not deny, I can't even deny it, some stories in classic Doctor Who are way too long. There's some stories that don't need to be, say, 6 parts or 7 parts, or obviously you've got the War Games, which is a 10-parter. So I think having the shorter run times does help grab people's attention and keep people engaged, because sometimes it can be hard to sit down for a very long period of time. So, like, for example, the Daleks in colour. The new colorisation version is only 75 minutes long, so only about an hour and 25 minutes. It's roughly, it's quite short and sweet, really. Whereas the original was around 175 minutes, which is nearly 3 hours, and that is quite a lot to just sit through. The War Games now has been announced that it's only going to be a 90-minute epic, so only about an hour and a half, and the original is 4 hours, because it's a 10 part of 25 minutes. So I know which version most people will probably want to sit down and watch from start to finish. They're going to want to watch the hour and a half one as opposed to the 4-hour one. So that is a positive. There is obviously a negative to having that much of a shorter runtime for stories that originally were longer, but we'll discuss that in the negatives. But yeah, so there's a positive for some people. They'll be more interested in watching it if it's shorter than if it's much longer. And then I'd say the final positive that I have for these colorizations is some, not all, but some of the new updated effects that they've put into place, and there's been some slight tweaks to dialogue, which again is also a positive and a negative, and I will discuss that in the negative section. But some of the positives, I would say, like we've seen in the Daleks in colour, they've used updated special effects for the Dalek ray blasters, so when they are shooting people, you can actually see something come out of it, and they've updated that effect, whereas obviously in the original they didn't have any of that. But that was just the cheesy fun of the 60s Doctor Who. So to a degree, I kind of missed that. But it is nice, and it is a good little alternative. They also did change a little bit of dialogue in terms of referring. There's a line in the Daleks in colour where the Daleks say our Dalek forefathers, but they've changed that to Khalid forefathers. And I suppose that does help and fit with the lore that we know going forward, such as, like, obviously you've got stories like Genesis of the Daleks, where, you know, they're not called Daleks straight away. You've got the Khalids. They're the Khalids who then become the Daleks. So updating that makes more sense lore-wise, and so I appreciate that as well. And there's some effects as well, and some sound effects actually that they've included that do make more sense and are a little bit better. Like the sound of the cloister bells is added when the TARDIS is failing to take off in the Daleks in colour, so that's really cool, because when the cloister bell sounds, you know danger's happening, and this story is all about danger. So yeah, so some of those are really, really good. So I do appreciate that, and I will be interested to see the updated effects and also the sound effects that they include for the War Games, because I'm sure that will be good. But that is where the positives end. So now it is time to move on to discuss my personal negatives about these colorizations. And now on to the negatives. This is the part of the video that I've not really been looking forward to. But I'm not going to dawdle too much on it, because obviously it's just my opinion. It's just a couple of things that I think got to me when I originally watched the Daleks in colour. So I'd say, like, the first negative, and this does link to my positives as well, is I did say that the shorter run times can also be a bad thing, and they really, really can. When you've got stories like the Daleks, which was originally a nearly 3-hour epic 7-part story, and obviously the War Games, which was originally 4 hours and has now been cut down to just only 90 minutes, that's a lot of cut content. You know, you're talking at least 2 hours cut from the War Games, and the War Games is full of lore, full of history. So you could accidentally miss out on some of that history if they don't edit it in the right way. However, it would be silly of me to not admit that maybe, yes, there is some content that could be cut from the War Games, because did it really need to be a 10-parter? I think maybe, yeah, you could have cut at least 2 episodes out of that. So there is probably about an hour worth of content that you could have maybe cut from it. So I will concede I don't think it needed to be 10 parts. So yeah, cutting a little bit, I think would help the War Games. But I think there's going to be way too much cut, and that's going to be the big issue for me. And then in terms of the Daleks in colour, there was a fair bit cut out there. When you lower it to just a 75-minute episode, you're talking only about a 3-part story. You're cutting a 7-part story down to a 3-part story. So that's 4 parts worth of content that you're cutting. And I did notice that when watching the Daleks in colour, is some scenes jumped and didn't make sense. So yeah, I wasn't really a huge fan of that, if I'm being perfectly honest. So yeah, the shorter run times are a good thing, but for me, they can also be a bad thing. So I'm going to remain hopeful for the War Games, but considering you are lowering a 4-hour epic down to just an hour and a half, yeah, you're cutting at least half the story out. So that's giving me a bit of cause for concern as to what's being cut. The next negative that I have also links to what can be a positive, is I said about the special effects and the changes to the dialogue. Now, in terms of the effects and the editing, there's a few editing choices that are interesting but didn't really work out in my opinion. Is they added in a lot of like flashbacks, so different characters would have flashbacks to earlier parts of the story, which didn't really need to happen, especially in a shorter story. Like, in the original 1963 version with the 7 parts, it would make more sense to have a flashback, say in episode 7, to something that happened in episode 1 and 2, because it's been such a long time since we saw it. When the story's already short as it is, when it's only just over an hour, you don't need to have flashbacks. Sometimes they'd even have flashbacks to stuff that happened literally maybe 3 or 4 minutes ago. You know, literally like 3 or 4 minutes ago that happened, and they're giving you a flashback. You know, we can retain information, you know, I didn't like that, and it really drew me out. And some characters had flashbacks that didn't need to. The Daleks were watching scenes from earlier in the story, doesn't make sense. And one of my favourite scenes in the Daleks in colour, where Ian is inside a Dalek and having to escort the Doctor, Barbara and Susan through the Dalek city to try and escape, is like ruined in the Daleks in colour, because they got new music, which is great new music, but it's way too loud. You can barely hear the dialogue, and it's cut in such an awkward fashion. So I'm really not a fan of the way they did that, if I'm being perfectly honest. It ruined. That was like my favourite 15 odd minutes of the story, and it was ruined in the Daleks in colour. I was really looking forward to that. They've also added in a lot more uses of the Daleks' catchphrase as well, of exterminate. Now, yeah, it was in the original. There was 1 or 2 instances of it. But they use it in a variety of different ways. And, yeah, it didn't really need to happen. You don't really need to add that in. It didn't really add anything. Sure, it's the Daleks' catchphrase, but you don't need to add it in just because they're the Daleks. The story benefited fine without it. And I'm fairly certain I heard some newer Dalek voice actors in that as well. I'm fairly certain I might have even heard Nicholas Briggs in there, which you don't need to add that in if that's the case. I just think that some of the edits and things that they added in didn't need to be added in. That's just my personal thoughts on it. Yeah, so some of the special effects choices and additional lines weren't really necessary, and the shorter runtime can also be a bad thing for these colorizations and edits. So I'm going to be hopeful for the War Games, but I would be lying if I said I wasn't cautious and a bit worried. But that is my negatives overall. I'm sorry if you don't agree with those negatives. It's just my personal opinion. But now I'm going to give you some of my predictions for what I think the upcoming or future potential colorizations could be, and then I'll give you my overall thoughts on these colorizations. Okay, so now that I've done the positives and the negatives of the colorizations and edits, I'm now going to give you 2 potential colorizations that I would like to see, and I think could be a shout for future colorizations. I've decided to pick one from Hartnell and one from Troughton, just to be fair, because there's a long list I could do. Obviously, we'd like them all to maybe come out in colour, especially after that little teaser trailer that we had from the Hartnell years demonstrating all the potential stories in colour. But I just decided to pick one from each, just to be fair. And then I'm going to give you just my overall thoughts on these colorizations and whether I think overall they've been a good thing and overall they've been a bad thing. We'll see. But the pick that I decided to do for the William Hartnell colorization was I decided to go with the Dalek Invasion of Earth. And there's kind of an obvious reason as to why I chose this. I mean, think about it realistically. We had the Peter Cushing Dalek movies where we had Doctor Who and the Daleks, and then we had the Dalek Invasion of Earth 2150 AD with Peter Cushing, meaning we've already had a version of the Dalek Invasion of Earth in colour anyway. So it wouldn't be a big deal if then we had the actual serial from the Hartnell years then in colour. And it's an iconic story as well, because it is the first departure of the companion Susan. So it's quite a strong contender. It's got a lot of history there, and it's for a lot of people like a fan favourite Hartnell. It's like a go-to Hartnell story. I know lots of people whose favourite story of Hartnell is the Dalek Invasion of Earth. So you know it would be a popular one to do. And then you'd have both the Daleks and the Dalek Invasion of Earth in colour. So I think that would be a good shout. And then the second shout, there's definitely other Patrick Troughton stories that probably would get it over this. This is just me, as it's my favourite Troughton story. And it's one that I think would look really cool in colour. I decided to go with The Mind Robber. Now, The Mind Robber is it's a very short story anyway. Like, there's a couple of episodes in The Mind Robber, which I think are literally less than 20 minutes. Especially part 1, since that was thrown together last minute. I believe that's literally only about 16 or 17 minutes, and it's set completely in a white backdrop. So to colorise that, you just have to colorise the Doctor, Jamie and Zoe, really. But I think that would look really, really cool in colour, especially when you go to the land of fiction, and you have like the toy soldiers would look great. You've got like the Medusa, you've got the Minotaur, the Unicorn, you've got like Rapunzel and Blackbeard. I think it would all look really, really cool in colour. So if I'm being honest, I think the Mind Robber would be a great one for Patrick Troughton. But let's be real, I think probably otherwise they'd probably go down the route of doing like the Tomb of the Cybermen or the Invasion, or maybe even one of the Dalek ones, like Power or Evil. But for me personally, I think the Mind Robber is definitely the way to go for my potential Troughton. When could we expect those? I wouldn't say anytime soon, but since we had the Daleks last year and the War Games announced this year to come out early next year, you could find that maybe another maybe another colorization could happen and get announced at the end of 2025 for 2026. You don't know. So it's a possibility. And then as for my overall thoughts on the colorizations, do I think they're good? Do I think they're bad? I would say overall, they're neither good nor bad. I'm going to sit on the fence, I think, a little bit until we've had the War Games officially come out, because the positives from the colorizations are also negatives and the negatives are also positives, depending on how you look at it and if this is your first version of that story that you've watched. I'd say if I had to lean one way or the other, I slightly would say a bad thing, because I do go back to watch the original serial of the Daleks as opposed to the colorization version of the Daleks. So I'd probably lean more towards bad, but I do really like seeing them in colour. So I am going to wait and see what happens with the War Games. So then we've had multiple 1960s stories in colour, and then I can be a proper judge on it. But I think for now, they're about average. I'd say there's good things about them and there's bad things about them. So if you like these colorizations, that is perfectly fine, and I'm glad that you do. I like them to some degree, but just my enjoyment of them is probably not as high as yours. But I'm glad that we still have the originals anyway, so it's not like anyone really loses out. But I hope you did enjoy this little video and me ranting a little bit about the colorizations. I just want to say again, like, a happy 61st birthday to Doctor Who, happy anniversary, it is brilliant. You're still my favourite show, and I look forward to the Christmas special this year and seeing what Season 2 has to offer. But if you did like this video by giving it a thumbs up, comment down below what are your thoughts on the colorizations, and are you excited for the War Games in colour? And subscribe if you are new. But for now, this is the Nerdy Grail signing off. I hope you have an amazing day, and I will see you all next time. Bye for now, everyone.